Welcome, everyone, to another webinar from Offsites. Today, we're talking about how executive assistants can plan high ROI team retreats. And we got to thank VimCal for sponsoring this webinar. I think most of you heard about this webinar through VimCal, so shout out to them. Thanks, team. And I want to just briefly welcome Kelly and Jake to the mix, have them introduce themselves, and we'll jump right into it so that this is all value, no fluff, plenty of time for Q&A. Y'all are busy, so we want to make the best and highest use of your time. So I'm Jared. I'm the founder, CEO of Offsite. We plan team retreats and offsites for hundreds of remote and hybrid companies, from remote to Buffer to Webflow. Also mute people when they're too loud on webinars. Sorry. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Kelly from Cumulus and EAs to the rescue. Go
Hi,
ahead.
everyone. My name is Kelly Munoz. I am EA to the CEO at the Cumulus Coffee Company. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. First at home cold brew, nitro cold brew, cold espresso machine without a nitrogen tank. The coffee is banging. Get on it. And I'm also the founder of EAs to the Rescue. It's a global networking group for executive assistants to share resources. Our applications have closed for the quarter and they will reopen again in March. So definitely follow us on LinkedIn, follow me, send me a message, and we'll see, make sure that you get in when the applications open again.
And Jake?
Yeah, and I'm Jake. I'm the head of sales here at Offsite.com. Prior to this role, I was chief of staff at my last company, where I was the main kind of principal support for the founder and CEO of a nuclear fusion startup. Prior to that, I worked in luxury hotels. Prior to that, I started my professional career as an educator. Working with ages 2 to 102 in music education land. And so I'd always tell my nuclear engineers, hey, explain this to me like I have a degree in tuba. And it always usually got the point across there. But my first ever offsite I planned was band camp for about 250 middle schoolers or so. And let me tell you, that was way harder than anything I've done here at offsite.com. So excited to chat with you all about sort of the best practices and how to plan higher ROI retreats.
So I kind of wanted to start with what's the backdrop or the context in which an EA is typically planning an offsite. And so, Kelly, you're going through this day in and day out as an EA to a CEO. You also are working with hundreds of EAs around the world. And so walk us through, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people listening and empathizing and crying as they hear it. But CEO asks you to plan a team retreat. Tell us about like everything else you're balancing at the time when you're being asked to plan a team retreat, and then maybe the first steps of starting to plan a team retreat. And then Jake, you have your ear to the ground with a lot of our clients, many of whom are EAs. So would love to hear kind of what you're seeing as well. But we'll start with Kelly, who's living it every single day.
Yeah. So usually as EAs, we're tackling more than just like the basic administrative and operational executive management of the offices. And then usually they'll throw a monkey wrench in and say, hey, I need an offsite next week and you have $500. Just like, what? So usually I ignore all that and I work backward. Like, okay, what is your actual vision? Like, what do you want this to look like? What is your outcome? Versus I want 5 rooms and this many. No. Tell me what you want, what the vibe is that you're looking for, and then we can actually try to finagle a budget out of that and give them a realistic, like usually my go-to is high, medium, low. This is what we can get, like what your vision is. This is what we can compromise. And based on what the budget you gave me, this is what you can do. And that kind of sets them in a different tone and increases budget. So whenever you hear like a super low budget, in one ear, out the other ear, go with their vision and then work from there.
Jake, are you experiencing the same thing? Or
Oh, yes. The amount of lovely people I talk to are like, hey, Jake, I just got this instruction from my CEO. I don't even know where to start. I actually had one of those calls earlier this week. The number one thing I agree with is sort of not only sort of like what is the starting ending point, right? But also what are the business objectives that you want to accomplish during this experience, right? What is the experience that you want your team members to walk away having, right? And start from that point and help your CEO or whoever you're supporting think through the why of the event. Do we really need to do this? And what do I want to make sure that my team members understand is going to happen during this? Because that then lets us start from planning in a more thorough manner, right? I think the other part is if you're getting any kind of pushback on budget, or if they say, hey, I want to do this for $500 a person, just open AmericanAirlines.com and show them what a flight from New York City to Phoenix is, or anything like that, and let them say like, hey, that's not doable, right? It's important to start with realistic expectations with the person that you're supporting to make sure that they're not surprised when you show them a budget that's $2,500 a person or $3,000 a person as well.
So I think this is going to open up a lot of conversation around essentially how do you manage your CEO, or how do you manage your executive when planning a team retreat? Because I'm hearing, Kelly, that you're getting typically like a low budget, maybe unrealistic expectations of timeline and when to plan an offsite, and then you're skillful in sort of moving towards what is the vision, what's your why behind this, what are the business objectives, and then trying to kind of restart the conversation. And then Jake, you affirmed a lot of that, and so yeah, Kelly, would love to hear a little bit more about kind of CEO or executive management best practices then, which could certainly be in the frame of planning an offsite and team retreat, but maybe it has additional benefits for any kind of project or task that you might be working on as an executive assistant. So you're already starting on a few of them. If you can give us any additional frameworks, that'd be incredible.
Yeah, so usually the CEO is just like this visionary, right? They don't actually know what goes on in the background and what it takes to execute everything. They just think, wow, it just happened. That's not how it works. So one of my tricks is, all right, who are your stakeholders for this? Usually they will have a better grasp of what is needed and they can help you guide the CEO as well. The CEO will give them their own objectives of what they want seen from their teams and what outputs they want from their teams for whatever it is that you're working on. And when you deploy them to help you, you'll get so many great answers back, and it's a great way to work backwards. Um, Again, I love my CEOs, but many of them just don't have a clue of what goes on and everything has like one moving part has a million other moving parts, and it's kind of like a car engine. There's like if one thing goes out, nothing's going to work and your car's not going anywhere. So everything's got to be greased up and moving at the same time, but you got to make sure that everyone is involved that needs to be involved. So definitely loop in those other stakeholders, those other executives who report to the CEO as well, and leverage the knowledge that they have with them. That way you can actually flow a little bit better and not feel so stressed out with very little information or your $500 budget for 400 people.
This a real example, this $500 budget.
No, it's not. But I did have one time tell me we need a conference for 200 people and our budget is $10,000. And I'm like, okay, well, is this all day or is it 2 hours? Because like, are they getting ham and cheese sandwiches? Like, what's happening right now? So once they realize, oh, we want to start at 10 a.m., there needs to be food, there needs to be lunch, there needs to be a stage. Staging has 1,000 things going on as well, lighting, AV. Then you've got like COIs, and everything costs money and nothing is free. So you've got to really know and understand exactly what they think they want and then involve the other stakeholders, and it really makes your life just so much easier.
What if you don't have access to those other stakeholders? Like I'm just thinking about it as a CEO, and like I'm okay with this CEO slander for the next like 45 minutes, but like what if you needed to get board members involved, or certain major investors where you don't have a previous relationship perhaps as an EA, but they're in the ear of your CEO or founder? Like how might you go about those conversations?
I think at that point you really got to hone in with your CEO and find out what is the actual head count that you're aiming for, understanding that many people probably won't show up if this is a team offsite. Some people have emergencies, so just account for 10 to 20% drop off, have that little buffer. And then from there, you can work on the objectives and what that vision looks like. And then you can start looking at everything else that's associated with it, whether it's travel, local, venues, catering, whatever it is. But at that point, you can start your high, medium, low. And then that way, at least you have a guiding point. They don't have to be perfect, they just have to be estimates, and they can decide what works. And then once everything, you have everything, then you can actually just start executing and deducting from there. But it's a huge checklist for one person to endure. And if you ever have a marketing team or a sales team, it's really cool to bring them in too, because they might have some insight into how to execute things and then you didn't even think about.
Yeah, great. Jake, you bring chief of staff experience, so a little bit different than executive assistant, but perhaps one of those stakeholders that an EA would bring to the conversation about planning an offsite. And you're also talking to dozens of EAs a month and planning their various offsites. So what other tips could you add to this conversation around managing your CEO and helping them ultimately plan a higher ROI offsite in this case?
Absolutely. So I think the biggest thing that I start with every single conversation, besides just the why, is the phrase of what are the things that we cannot accomplish over Zoom, right? Most of my clients that I chat with are remote first companies and things like that. And then we get everybody together in a webinar format like this, or we get everyone in person, and then we just do PowerPoint presentations, right? That is not the point of gathering together anymore. You can share a PowerPoint over Zoom very, very effectively, right? You could share a slide deck or Excel spreadsheets much more effectively and collaborate online than you can in person, right? So what is the business objective that is driving us to meet in person and gather in person, right? To me, that's things like collaboration. That is things like going through a product roadmap. Like, for example, the offsite leadership team just went through that and said, okay, we only have so many puzzle pieces that we can work with in so much time. How do we get that together? Those are things and conversations that happen much better in person, right? So if your CEO says to you, hey, I want to get the full team together on January 9th, and you look at the calendar and says it's December 10th and it's a 200-person company, real thing that's happening right now, right? The first question I would say to my the person I'm supporting is, what is the in-person goal of that experience, right? Oh, we want to have a company kickoff. Great. How long? An hour? That's not worth the money, right? So using this to build, and using this time, especially right now in December, where you're creating the year plan of like, okay, what are the intentional moments in time over the next year that we want to gather together, and what are the objectives of that time, right? I think the other big thing I would say when you're talking about gathering stakeholders is to really ensure, number one, availability. That's something that I see happen a lot is before you go to any hotels or things like that, people come to, so like, we want March. And then we get into the conversation. It's like, oh, well, actually, well, not March 1st, not March 2nd, not March 3rd, not March 4th. And then they go through the whole, oh, actually, we're not available in March, right? And so make sure that as you're gathering the stakeholders, that you're looking at what is their availability. Do they have any paternity leave scheduled? Do they have any PTO scheduled? Do they have any things, or do you know that they need to have paternity scheduled and you don't see that in their calendar? Kind of do the math with them and alongside them, right? So availability is the number one driver of date selection, when it really should be, it shouldn't be date availability. You should tell people a year in advance or 6 months in advance, before people are hired, hey, we're having this event because we've pre-planned it. These are the dates you're expected to be there. And obviously, if things change or things happen, right? But no one should be surprised on December 10th that they're supposed to be in another country on January 9th, right? So make sure you're thinking through that as well.
Yeah, I would love to kind of continue going down this thread. So, we're talking about how to plan high ROI offsites. Arguably, the biggest investment that you're making as a company is the team's time that's being invested in the offsite, and like all the collective salaries of your attendees multiplied by their hourly rates, in addition to the budget for catering and room blocks and all that and travel. So, Jake, what are some of the things that we're doing that you've seen to be the highest ROI when considering like the team's time, and also thinking through like as an executive assistant, how can you ensure that our clients, for example, are getting the highest ROI out of having everyone attend these offsites? And then Kelly, I'll flip it to you, of course.
Absolutely. So I think in addition to high ROI, I want to take a second to picture the worst offsite you've ever attended, right? How did you walk away from that experience feeling? Right. For me, I've walked out of an offsite feeling like I was hungover for a month and just could not be motivated to open my laptop because what had happened at that offsite was so rough, right? Where I'm just like unmotivated and and think through what were the things that caused that, right? It was probably you were sitting for a very long time in an underground boardroom that didn't have natural light for 3 days. No one knew what they were doing. No one knew where they were going. No one knew what the experience was going to be. And also, you found out that you're getting a pay reduction or other XYZ terrible things, right? If that is the experience your team is having, they are probably not having a good time, nor do they want to stay with your company, right? That is not a high ROI experience, right? So, what is a high ROI experience? To me, that is something where we walk away understanding in detail exactly what my plan is for the next 6 months. It is where I feel like I am motivated by the company's mission, vision, and values. I feel like the activities that I had were a meaningful experience. I feel like I met someone who I haven't met before that maybe their Slack messages previously really annoyed me because their tone was unacceptable. And then I hear them talk and realize, oh, that's not who they are at all. I was just reading the messages wrong. It's things like that. That's what in-person high ROI time looks like, right? So how do we get there? We've already talked about sort of the why, the what first, right? So now we need to talk about where. At Offsite, we've curated a marketplace of properties that we have pre-vetted to make sure create great experiences for your team, right? So one of the hotels I used to work at was Courtyard Marriott. Love that brand for individual travel. It is not good for offsites because the boardrooms are uninspiring to say the least, right? And so choosing a venue that makes people feel like they're excited to be there. Choosing a venue that has access to a lot of natural light, a lot of natural airflow, a lot of natural easy walking distance experiences. So that way you're not piling into Ubers or buses or anything like that. And being very intentional with your site selection. That's a huge thing that's important of it. The second thing is what creates a meaningful experience? We've talked about that a little bit. But I think one thing I want to caution everyone against that I talk about is the difference between a meaningful experience and a fun experience. Fun is still very important to being meaningful, but it's not the same thing, right? So if you're like, oh my gosh, we're all going to go drive go-karts in the desert and we're going to go do all these really great things. Okay, what is that accomplishing? Right? How it maybe what you've done is you've done intentional seating in these off-roading vehicles where you have different team members that are creating a shared experience, right? But you have to take the time to curate who's sitting in that cart, right? Or maybe it's instead of going to Top Golf and getting drunk together, it's saying creating different wagers or bets of like, oh, if I hit this hole, I get a day off of work, or if I hit this hole, you have to answer a question, a get to know you question, right? Doing the activity, but taking the next step of like solving problems, meeting people on a deeper level, and creating that true human connection, not just we had fun together, right? So those are two examples of things I would that we help our clients curate here.
Kelly, I want to hear from you. How are you thinking about increasing ROI with your attendees' time of offsites and not just your CEO or principal?
Yeah. It's I think Jake hit a couple points that have a lot to do with it that a lot of people probably like oversee it. And it's just not the EAs that probably oversee it, but maybe even the people and talent team. Letting people know when they're onboarded, this is what is expected of them, right? And understanding and providing that information to them in advance, not as a surprise, but also acknowledging that, you know, just because they're getting onboarded and being informed doesn't mean that they will more than likely be there, because you also have to take into account that there's working parents out there. So consider academic calendars. Make sure that you're understanding that when there's academic calendars or weeks off that parents usually have to either get extra child care or transportation, they might not be able to go because those 2 weeks, either in the winter, December, spring, they just cannot go, and that's an extra expense on them. So try to avoid those those academic calendars. Whatever cities that you have your team in, just look them up. Like they're kind of standard based on counties, and you could just pull them out and just say, we have 5 parents out of a team of 6. Probably don't book that, right? And that's part also of the onboarding process, and acknowledging that you have parents who can't do it, and especially if they're stakeholders and they can't attend. Well, you just plan something when they can't attend, and now you got to reschedule the whole thing. So, I think that's really great, and also taking into consideration, the experience in like lighting, Jake, like how you mentioned, like I don't want to be in a room that's dark. I would rather just honestly just like hold my breath until I passed out. I am not going to sit in a room for 5, 6, 7 hours listening to people talk, and especially if they're monotone and they don't have any like character to them, even worse. So you have to really consider like what's going to make people available, not just physically but mentally available, and making sure that they have an exit at the end of the seating, right? So have a little breakout areas where they can have a little quiet area if they don't want to sit down. Consider, does the venue space have a space for them to get away from their seating, get a snack, a beverage, something they could still hear what's going on, not make too much noise, but also be able to take that minute, take that break. So there's a lot of things that people consider. So I personally like looking at things that are visually aesthetic, easy. And if you do something that's long distance, I'll give you an example. I did a 200-person conference for a VC that I was at, and we decided we were going to have it at Bear Mountain. And a lot of people don't know this, but Bear Mountain, you can stay at the actual lodge. There's not that many rooms, but there are rooms, and they've got some cool conference areas and ballrooms, and they really go above and beyond. But how do you get 200 people there from New York City? Well, you gotta bus them. So providing them the transportation, making sure there's teams available to check them in and make sure we have all their dietary restrictions and understand that people have to get back on time, having available busing routes to come back earlier if they need to. That really helped, and a lot of people enjoyed it. We had it in the summer, so we had like picnic styles, curating their seating arrangements, making sure that they were sitting in a picnic area based on the topic that they liked, based on the operators they wanted to sit with, and then also having some fun things, but making sure it was like, these 2 things are fun things. You don't have to sign up for them. You could just go when you have downtime. But here are your topics of discussion with smaller groups that we believe that would be great for you, and will make sure that you are sitting next to the person you want to sit with. And it really, really helps. So it's not just about fun, but also finding out who's going, who they want to meet. If they're building something, I see, you want to build work time in there as well. When it comes to offsites, I feel like if you're doing work time, I don't know if you mean we need to respond to emails or we need to work together as a team. But if you're at an offsite, I think it's laptop down, and everybody needs to be paying attention. You should not be working on emails. That's a personal thing for me, because you're curating this whole entire presentation and all this information for your team. They should be present. They shouldn't be on their phones or on their laptops. It should be laptops down, phones down, everyone's present and getting to know each other, and really getting to understand what the objective of the offsite is, because the company has something to say and they're putting a lot of effort to making sure that you're there and making sure that they have everything that you need to have a great time and a learning time.
We're gonna go to Q&A because there's like a lot of really good questions in the chat. So keep adding them.
Yeah.
I want to start with the very basic one, which is basically, what do you think is the best way to find availability for your attendees? And so I know at Offsite, we recommend our clients use a pre-offsite feedback form, and we give them a template that they can customize, but we ask for things like dietary preferences, travel sensitivities. You might ask for like the swag sizes if you're looking to order shirts for everyone. That would be a great place to ask, like, do you have any blackout dates for travel? You could also run a poll if you have, a few different, times that you're looking at. And that could lead into the conversation about negotiating. Like if you plan farther ahead, you can then look at different dates and possibly get a deal by agreeing to go to a venue for one date as opposed to another. But I know that's part of how we do it at Offsite. Jake, I don't know if you've picked up anything else along the way, or Kelly. But yeah, how do you think about getting like quick, streamlined answers to availability for companies? Pre-offsite feedback forms is one idea. Jake, anything to add to that?
That's a great one. And also especially because part of that question was, say about 150 people, right? Um, if you're trying to make all decisions by committee with 150 people, no decisions will be made, right? So what we recommend is starting with the principals who have to be there, right? So that might be the top 10 people that absolutely have to be there for presentations or for conversations or things like that. Obviously, we want to make sure this is accessible as possible for as many people as possible. But for 150 people, there's very high unlikelihood, unless people have a year notice, that you're going to get 100% attendance, right? So what I recommend is that people narrow down to 3 weeks or so. So say we have the first week of March, the second week of March, the third week of March, with the specific dates of what that is. Narrow it down to 3 that people get to choose from of are they available or not, and then add a question there of what would make this easier for you to say yes to these dates, right? So if you're March, for example, is spring break time for a lot of people. Say like, hey, I need extra funds for childcare. That's a great one. Or I have dogs and I don't have access to boarding in my area or a friend to watch them, like whatever things that you need. And then it doesn't mean that you're going to do that, right? But it's a good way to be informed, learn more about the needs of your employee base, but then also say to your leadership team, hey, here's what it would take to get 100% attendance for that. Right. So that's one really great example, but definitely not giving open dates, but narrow it down to 3 to 5 options for people with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. When you give too many dates, you get too many opinions and it just becomes chaotic. Yeah. And, back to like sizing and little things, dietary restrictions. My little hack is during onboarding, I create a staff landing page where they have everything, resource materials to them day one. They can always look at it. But we have a shared drive as well. But that page is specifically to them. That page is rerouted back to me, and I have their sizing, their dietary restrictions, their favorite foods, their favorite desserts. I have all these personal things on them in the HR background. So when this does happen, all I've got to do is pull the information. I don't have any questions to ask. We are moving forward. So like it's little things like that, little hacks that you start from the very beginning and you just build on them, and it just makes your life a whole lot easier.
I love that. Like when we do onboarding, we have this sheet called a personal operating system that we have new employees fill out. And so we're typically asking for like personal value systems, and we're asking for like social media handles if they want other people at the company to like, build community with them offline, hobbies, even like communication preferences, and like things that like facts to know about them. Et cetera, et cetera. But those could be some really good things to add. And then you could choose to make them available to the rest of the company, or just private to, assistants and people planning things like offsites. But that's a great idea. Thank you for sharing, Kelly. Another question that came up was about how do you build in work time throughout an offsite? Time for people to check emails, do actual work, like take sales calls or customer support calls. Is there like some sort of breakout room or side room to do work? So one idea that we implement a lot is we bake a lot of flex time into an agenda. And so that's 15-minute breaks pretty frequently throughout the meeting. And that allows you to like run over a little bit if like a session's going long, you don't want to stop a great conversation. We also will do that sort of closer to lunch, have maybe like a 2-hour lunch and like have an hour for lunch, and then a lot of like time for unstructured social bonding and
Mm-hmm.
collaboration, but also that's a great place to work. And then we'll do flex time typically for 2-3 hours before dinner. That's just one idea. Another could be to sort of plan the offsite with that work in mind, and like have uh your sales teams like try and schedule calls outside of those working hours, or possibly have another room available and like do shifts if you absolutely must have people doing like customer support calls, but trying to have them do that kind of work during non-essential sessions for them. But Kelly, I'd love to hear more from you on this.
Yeah, no, I agree with the break rooms and the breaks between sessions. I don't believe in having sessions back to back. That's brutal. Definitely, 15 minutes I think is a sweet spot. That way people can rush to the restroom, rush to check their email, whatever it is that they should not be doing during the sessions. But yeah, I love your idea, Jared, on, creating shifts on who's essential for what sessions and making sure that, maybe you have a team of 5 and maybe 2 of them can be off session handling whatever needs to get handled while 3 participate and then rotate that. I think that's a fantastic idea, actually. I never even thought of that, so thank you.
Jake, I'm sure you have a couple things to add. You never.
Absolutely. So I truly believe that high school teachers understand what they're doing. And what I mean by that is that most high schools schedule a day with 45-minute class, 15-minute passing period, right? The reason for that, if we get into the human psychology, is because the human brain can be in a deep work in a group setting for about 20 minutes max, right? So if you think back to high school, you had your walk-in session for 5 minutes, your lesson for 10 minutes, your group work for 20 minutes, and then 10 minutes for any questions at the end, right? That is because of the human psychology of how our brains work, right? And so if you can think through your sessions in that form of what that looks like, right? I definitely agree with building in breaks and stuff. And I also do think that there is a lot of power in being laptop off. But the key for that is you have to do the pre-work ahead of time, right? So for example, if you know ahead of time that you are planning 6 months in advance for an all hands for your whole team, it is not fair to your customer success team or to your sales team to expect them to be on client calls or be on call during that time when the executives are in the boardroom or at the bar, right? There is very few businesses in the world that truly need to have 24/7 response times for a lot. Not again, I know some of you here may have some of those businesses, right? But if you do the proper pre-planning and you say in your email signature a month ahead of time, hey, just so you all are aware, on these 3 dates, we are going to be completely unavailable. So that way we can work on our team to be a better service for you, our clients, right? And putting that in people's email signatures and email blasts and letting people know ahead of time to not expect a response during those times, right? Is one really powerful way to make sure this is inclusive for everybody. The other big thing I would say for laptops off for the executives as well, specifically, because I know there's a lot of decisions that need to be made quickly, is they know ahead of time they're going to be at this offsite. You as their EA know they're going to be at this offsite, right? So what systems can you put in place to make sure all questions and tasks are done before they get to the offsite? And then say, hey, absolutely, he'll respond a week from now. Here's why. And just tell people we're on an offsite. We're doing these things, right? Most people are totally fine to respond or wait for their answer. So whoever asked that question, hopefully those are a few tips and tricks that might help.
I love the email signature thing. I actually do that myself when office is going to be closed. I say our offices will be closed on the following days and I put it in bold and it actually works.
Yeah, it wouldn't work if you don't put it in bold, but because you put it in bold,
In bold
absolutely.
and italicized.
Underlined and italicized.
Throw a highlight in there.
And a GIF as
And
well.
a GIF.
Yes.
I'll switch up the line of questioning here. Sarah Slack. Hopefully, I'd be really curious if your last name is actually Slack or if that's just like a work thing. I'm sure it is. But you had a great question. Any good negotiation tactics to drive down price? And so, Jake, this is what we do all day, every day at Offsite, and you're a self-proclaimed least salesy salesperson. So I'll let you start. And then Kelly, I'd love to hear sort of what you're seeing in the field as well as an EA, and then any like tips from like the EAs to the rescue community around this.
Yep. So as I mentioned in kind of my response, offsite.com, we built this curated marketplace where we also have great relationships with these hotels where you automatically get access to 20 to 40% discount, right? So that's option 1. Option 2 is if you really want to do this by yourself, there are some pro tips that I would always suggest. Number 1, everything is negotiable. They say it is not, but it is, right? Things that should be waived is parking fees, any amenity fees, meeting space fees, and usually any kind of like auto gratuity or things like that are negotiable, right? Things that are less negotiable are food cost, because that's a pretty set cost. They have to make a profit. And then number two, the room rate is absolutely negotiable. But like any good negotiation, you have to hold your cards close to your chest. And number two, you have to make sure that they know that they are not the only skin in the game, right? So if you are negotiating with just one hotel, you're probably not going to get the best rate possible. So narrow down to your top 3 to 5 options with your executive team before you start aggressively negotiating. Let your executive team know you're going to be doing everything you can to get this price down, but get them comfortable with whatever those 3 options or 3 to 5 options are for budgets. Then narrow in on your top 2 to 3 and then aggressively negotiate with those 3 options. Don't do it with all 10, because that's just going to burn a lot of salespeople that aren't going to want to work with you in the future. But then don't be afraid to say, hey, hotel A offered me A. I really like your hotel, but I have to make sure that my executives see that I'm doing stuff, and just be afraid to ask not so much for a percentage, but like, hey, here's what they gave me. Can you match that? And then be like, oh, actually, you got to drive it down just a little bit, right? We typically save anywhere from 20 to 40% on things. The other big tip for driving down the cost is make sure everything is in writing before you sign the contract. So, for example, your audiovisual. Ask to be sent the menu for your AV before you sign the hotel contract, because that is so difference in price, right? But one of our clients, for example, we did this. We got sent the AV pricing. They knew that it was a 60-person group. They knew what the meeting schedule was, and they sent us the pricing. Later on in the process, they tried to tell our clients that it was actually going to be a $31,000 AV charge. And we said, absolutely not, because that's not what you gave us in writing ahead of time. And so we were able to get that price back down to $1,500 total versus $31,000, right? So we could only do that because we had it in writing from the hotel ahead of time. So that's the big things that I would say as sort of some pro tips.
Yeah, and I see that one of the comments, someone said, watch out for those little plus signs on the contract. Call them out. And honestly, don't be afraid to negotiate. The worst thing you can hear is no. The worst thing you don't know is that you don't know. So just ask and say, listen, this is the budget that I'm being given. What can you do to bring this down so that we can make a quicker decision, so that we can also possibly book you as well? You're gonna get a lot. You'll probably be surprised. They'll come back and say, okay, we'll remove all of this. And you're like, oh shit, great. And you end up building a really great relationship with them. Some of the venues that I've worked with in the past, we still keep in touch, and they still reach out to me. And when I need something, I'm like, hi. Yeah, they still help out as much as possible. So negotiation sounds scary, but it's not. And you actually will end up with a better relationship with them, because you're being a little bit more vulnerable, and they understand that you're trying to do your best. And people are people. They're not as scary as you think they are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
while we're on the CEO slander train this hour, like you can always blame it on your CEO or founder or executive and say like, hey, my boss is giving me this hard budget to work with. And like whether it's true or not, you could just like create a common enemy and use that to drive negotiations. And so you're like getting on the same side of the table as them to solve the problem, as opposed to being on opposite ends of the negotiation. So that is something you could try. And yeah, definitely watch out for those contracts, because it's one thing to save a lot of money on paper, but then it's another thing to have to give back a lot of that money when you're overbooking a room block, or you're not meeting your food and beverage minimums, or things like that. And those are negotiable items as well. Like you can ask to get a food and beverage minimum reduced, and then go take everyone off site from your offsite for lunch, or get a cheaper option. Same with AV. Same with getting like the meeting space fee waived entirely or reduced if you're booking a certain amount of rooms. Like most things in that contract are negotiable, and so keep that in mind. And yeah, let's go to another question. There's a question about keeping people engaged during the offsite that I think is a great place to converse. So again, we're talking about high ROI team retreats. We talked about making sure that enough people can be available for that offsite, maybe doing a little bit of pre-work. Now they're there. What are you actually doing to keep people locked in, engaged, benefiting from the offsite? Because Dakota, for example, said that on her last offsite, the team was starting to like drop off because the content wasn't very engaging at the end. What might Dakota have done differently, or like how would you recommend creating the highest possible or the highest engagement around the offsite and therefore the highest ROI? Callie, I'll throw this to you first.
For remote first companies, that's like kind of like the hardest things, right? Only because you can't, everybody's in their whatever location that they're at. One of the simplest things I can think of, just like off the top of my head right now, is just letting people know in advance what to expect, giving them an agenda so they know what's going to be happening. And personally, if there's certain people that kind of like check out, personally engage with them ahead of time just to make sure that they're comfortable, they're okay, and just make sure everybody knows cameras on. Because especially if it's an internal company offsite, like you already, everybody knows everybody, and cameras should be on so that everybody feels like, okay, I must be engaged. I can't just step away right now and turn off my camera, go to the gym and come back and no one will notice. So it's one of those things where it's tough, but when it's in person, it's a little bit easier, and it's like more of, I know these people because I see them every day. I know their vibe. I know what they like. I know how they interact. And Jared, you mentioned your personal operating system, which I love. I call it a team playbook. That helps, right? That helps in what you can use to engage your team, knowing their likes and dislikes and the way they learn and the way they engage. It's like you can throw that in there too. I'm actually working on, I call it a team playbook, and I'm be sending out to my team right now, trying to figure out what is your working style, what is your preference of communication, you know, like the hobbies, things like that. It's so helpful because if you have this information ahead of time, you already kind of know who's not going to be engaged and who will be engaged, and you see them all, especially if you're in person, you see the ones that are not engaged.
Jake, you have anything to add here? I'm sure you do. Just kidding.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So my favorite mantra when it comes to engagement is if you're talking at them and not with them, you're going to lose engagement. We all are in the world of TikTok, where if you can't capture someone's attention within 30 seconds, you're going to lose them, right? Obviously, in corporate setting, it might be a little bit longer, 32 seconds maybe, right? But if you are showing a PowerPoint for 2 hours, you're going to lose them. Right. If you are making them sit for 2 hours, you're going to lose them. Right. Whenever I am planning or facilitating an offsite, there is music playing in the background. There is a stretch break every 10 minutes, right? Or asking people to move their seats or move into smaller breakouts or do think, pair, share, meaning you think about it by yourself for 2 minutes. Then you pair up with someone and discuss it for 5 minutes. And then you share your learnings with the group for 10 minutes, right? It's not just we're being talked at for 10 minutes. We are talking with each other for 10 minutes, right? Emily, the founder or the chief of staff at Lattice, has a phrase where she says that offsites are not for sharing information, they are for making decisions, right? So pre-work is making sure everyone does the homework ahead of time. So that way, when you're in the room, you are solving the problems and making decisions, not sharing information for the decisions. Other companies have different models for that, but I agree with that because then it's a conversation, and I don't need to spend 10 minutes in the room reading something I could have read on the plane over, right? So that's one example. The other big thing I would say when it comes to keeping people engaged is add more breaks than you think are humanly possible, right? That you need, right? Because part of the offsite is to recreate the water cooler moments that happened at an office, right? The other part of it is to make sure that your people aren't dead inside, right? And so if you're just talking with someone or at someone for 2 hours, you're not doing it right. So the other big thing I think when it comes to engagement is that people are so tired from traveling and we don't account for it. I see way too many agendas where we are starting yoga at 7:30 East Coast time, and when I lived on the West Coast, that meant it was 4:30 my time, and I physically could not get out of bed that early, right? And so then by the time 3 o'clock rolled around, I was dead to the world, right? So making sure that if you're starting something, that you're starting at a reasonable hour, maybe 9 o'clock, right? Or giving people a full travel day to adjust and making sure that you're thinking through what are my not only my psychological needs, but also my true body needs when it comes to rest and brain breaks.
I want to add another question related to programming here, which is at least Callie, from your perspective, like what do you think about executive coaches, outside speakers, facilitators at an offsite? Like, does your community invest in those sort of things? Find them valuable? Kind of asking you personally because at offsite, like we would recommend speakers and facilitators to most of our clients, and we have those type of resources bookable in our marketplace. So we are a little bit biased. And then I was personally a speaker, facilitator for many years for like Fortune 1000 executive teams and being brought in to facilitate their offsites and like charged a decent amount for that. So I'm very biased, but have you seen people investing in those resources in order to keep like high ROI engaging offsites happening? And if so, like what's the conversation like around outside speakers, facilitators in the EAs to the rescue community?
Yeah, so I think it's industry specific and very team specific, right? I was at a large mobile technology firm at one point, and everybody knows their name, but we had some offsites and we hired facilitators because even though our offsites were maybe like 4 hours for that day, we needed decisions and we needed someone that was unbiased and they can drive us to keep us focused, and that's helpful. And then there's been other instances where we had an offsite and we managed it because we knew who we were working with, and it wasn't really a teaching or decision making conference, but offsite, but it was more of a conference setting and informative and networking and resource sharing. So I think it's very specific on what your needs, like especially like EAs. If you have an SK of you're supporting a lead of customer success or sales, you have an SKO, you're probably going to want a speaker. You probably want a facilitator only because there's a different vibe with sales teams than they are with like a marketing team. A marketing team will probably want a facilitator, but they're going to want something a little bit extra. Sales kickoff, that's what an SKO means. So there's about every company does a little bit different. You'll have an annual, which should be in the beginning, and then some of them do in the mid-year. So I've been thrown into the wolves with zero information, anything. So usually what I did was get a really good speaker and managed from there, but it helped. But again, it's very industry specific, very team specific, very meeting specific, depending on what you want your outcomes to be.
Thank you. I'm actually going to invite Brianna to join us. She's on day 2 at Offsite, and we were in the chat to see if she wanted to jump in and share any perspective here. So, yeah, Brianna, what's your thoughts on bringing in executive coaches, facilitators for offsite planning?
Well, there was a question that popped up in the chat that resonated a lot with me. And so if it's okay, I'm going to touch on that one a little bit. So there was a question
Sure.
about, people in like basically leaders wanting to talk a lot about a topic that only interests and excites them. And so first of all, I want to share, I have been at offsites where this has happened and where I've heard people get up and speak on stage and ramble on about a topic that they might find really interesting, but that really is not aligned towards their audience's passions and priorities. Like Jake has been saying, you do tend to lose your audience when a session like that happens, and it starts to sort of degrade the trust in the organization as a whole, because the audience listens to this session and they feel like, well, if this session is not aligned with what I care about, does the company really care about what I care about at all, right? So it's really, really important to be very thoughtful about the sessions and about the topics that are being facilitated during those sessions and during those, presentations. So if you have a leader that is insisting on getting up on stage and rambling on for 2 hours about a topic that is very exciting to them, but maybe not necessarily exciting to the people that they are speaking to, I would really start with like empathy and perspective, right? So really acknowledging their expertise. And so starting by validating their knowledge and their enthusiasm on the topic. I really understand that your passion for this topic is very clear and it's really, really impressive. We all know how much you know about this. We all know how excited you are about this. But, also again, highlighting the importance of connecting with the audience's interests. So, hey, I understand that this is very important to you, but can we, do a gut check here? Just make sure that this is going to resonate with the team so that they leave inspired and ready to act, right? The whole purpose of spending all of this money, investing all of this time is to get people into a room inspired and ready to act on the company's mission, vision, and values. And so again, I think that reframe is very important. I can understand that it can be a little bit intimidating to push back on your leadership and say, I don't know if this is necessarily the right approach, but I think, again, validating their passion for the topic, but then just reframing and making sure that there's alignment with the audience's goals is really, really important. Again, and we can also explore something like tying passion to strategic outcomes. So helping them to connect maybe their favorite topic to maybe towards like a broader business objective or team challenge. So maybe saying, hey, I understand you want to speak about this, but can we tie it back to X, Y, and Z business priority that we identified as something that we want to be a key outcome of this strategic offsite? Again, working with them on maybe co-creating some sort of like hook. So finding a way to work with them like that basically takes into account their passion and then grabs the audience. So what kind of story can we tell about this topic that will maybe resonate with the people that we're speaking to? And how can we draw them in with something that might be a little bit more, resonating with them before diving deeper into that topic? So just a couple of ideas that I had there.
Hell yeah. Brianna's dropping knowledge bombs on day 2 at Offsite. Thank you very much. Round of applause. We only got 5 minutes, so we're going to do one more question from the chat and then make sure Callie and Jake have a proper sign off. Wanted to go to the question about good use cases for AI when planning an offsite. And so Dakota had a great line in there about using ChatGPT to create exciting email communications leading up to the offsite. That's awesome. And we also have a client and channel partner called Change Engine, which has a free software around this. So check that out. And then you also, Dakota, used AI for agenda reminders and little blurbs about it. So that's great. Callie, I want to hear any AI uses you've used around offsite planning in particular, or have heard from your community.
My community uses a lot of AI, which is great. I think what we have to be careful with is sounding a little robotic and copy paste. So I would say if you're using it, just read it back to yourself. It sounds like it probably was written by a robot, then it was written by a robot. So just like adjust it to who you are a bit. I've recently have been, and it's only because I've been seeing more of it. I'm like, didn't I do this before? Implementing Zapier into my workflows. So things like, especially with an offsite, you want to send reminders. If you know that someone, you're sending out an email, and if they click on the link to make sure that they got, whatever pre-read, maybe that action, I don't know if you could set that up in there, will send them a reminder, or set up just like scheduled comms with them, push the calendar invite into their inbox and onto their calendar. Just doing a lot of these things. And I know getting people to open emails is rough, but maybe don't send an email that's a page long that looks like a novel. Like if I can't read it in 10 seconds, I will not read it. I'm just like, no. So, highlight important aspects of it, make it very high level. And if they want more information, like provide that information within a link, and they could take them to something that's more, they could dive deeper in, but definitely don't send novels.
Jake, bring us home because we got 3 minutes. Good use of AI for offsite planning.
Absolutely. I think for me, I'm going to answer this in the sense of what are not good uses for AI. Choosing a hotel, bad use of AI. AI is not smart enough to know whether or not the conference room has good airflow or not. It is not good enough to know whether or not there's natural light in the meeting space, all these other things. Whether or not the pool is closed, right? So don't use it to do that. Things that it is good at, that agreed with the communications aspect of it, sometimes brainstorming ways to change up, for example, a start, stop, continue exercise, right? I use ChatGPT to create a version 1 of that and then edited it to add a few more fun functions there, right? We used one of our client success leads who are do the planning alongside our customers. used ChatGPT to create a custom coloring book that was then printed by Amazon Books and then shipped to everyone's house. So that way they had something to do on the plane ride to their offsite, right? That's a great use of an AI tool, right? But AI is a tool, not a solution right now. That is, it's always going to be. But I think using it as a tool, just like you would your email account, is a really great use case of that. The other big thing about AI that I've seen work not so well is one of our clients sent us said like, hey, I used ChatGPT to create my experience in Bogota. And then half of the stuff that was created or suggested wasn't available, wasn't open anymore, or didn't even exist in the first place, right? So the data in there is not always correct. Sometimes it is, and it's a really good starting point, but don't say, plan me an offsite in this location, because it has no idea of all the pre-work, what the goals are, and all the stuff like we've talked about today. So just make sure that you double check their work as well.
Yeah, ChatGPT is also terrible at math. So uh, just don't ask it to do anything around budgeting whatsoever, other than maybe tell you the categories that you might need to consider when budgeting. But anyways, we are running out of time. So I want to thank Kelly and Jake first and foremost, as well as Brianna with the surprise cameo. So Kelly, where can we learn more about you? Where can we learn more about EAs to the rescue, Cumulus? I'll give you the mic here.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Kelly Munoz. I'm at the Cumulus Coffee Company, and the Slack net is mainly, my alarm's going off. My Slack networking group is global, and it's mainly just resource sharing. So you could just Google EAs to the rescue. We're on LinkedIn as well, so you give us a follow, and we will have memberships opening in March.
Awesome, thank you. Jake, where can people learn more about you and Offsite?
Yep, absolutely. So offsite.com, the number one tool to book your offsite or plan your offsite alongside us. Number two, feel free to add me on LinkedIn or message me anytime. As Jared mentioned, I pride myself on being the least salesy head of sales ever. If you have a question about a hotel, about an agenda session, about a facilitator, or anything like that, I promise to give you my unbiased view as much as possible, or ask you the prompting questions for you to make a decision on your own. Feel free to email me, jake@offsite.com.
I'm Jared, founder of Offsite, offsite.com, Jared at offsite.com. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks to VimCal again for sponsoring. See you next time. We try and do these regularly. So thanks, everyone.